He saw the priest stow the communion cup away, well in, and kneel an instant before it, showing a large gray boots all from under the lace affair he had on. Suppose he lost the pen of his. He wouldn't know what to do to. Bald spot behind. Letters on his back. I. No, I had trust. Molly told me one time. I asked her. I have sinned, or no, I have suffered, it is. And the other one. Our nails ran in. Meet one Sunday after the rosary. Do not deny my request. Turn up with a veil and black bag. Dusk in the light behind her. She might be here with a ribbon round her neck and the other thing all the same on the sly. Their character. That fellow that turned Queen's evidence on the invincibles he used to receive the Carey was his name, the communion every morning. This very church. Peter Carey, yes. No, Peter Claver I am thinking of. Dennis Carey. And just imagine that. Wife and 6 children at home. And plotting the murder all the time. Those craw thumpers, now that's a good name for them, there's always something shifty looking about them. They're not straight men of business either. Oh, no, she's not here, the flower, no, no. By the way, did I tear up that envelope? Yes, under the bridge. The priest was rinsing out the chalice, then he tossed off the dregs smartly. Wine makes it more aristocratic than, for example, if you drank what they're used against as porter or some temperance beverage. Wheatley's Dublin hot bitters or cane ale and Cochrane's ginger ale aromatic. Doesn't give them any of it, wine, only the other. Cold comfort. Pious fraud, but quite right. Otherwise they'd have one old boozer worse than another coming along, cadging for drink. Queer the whole atmosphere of the. Quite right. Perfectly right that is. Mr. Bloom looked back towards the choir. Not going to be any music. Pity. Who has the organ here, I wonder? Old Glenn, he knew how to make that instrument talk, the vibrato. £50 a year they say he had in Gardner Street. Molly was in fine voice that day, the Staubach Mater Oversini. Father Bernard Vaughan's sermon first. Christ or play. Christ, but don't keep us all night over it. Music they want. Foot drill stopped. Could hear a pin drop. I told her to pitch her voice against that corner. I could feel the thrill in the air, the fool, the people looking up, qui est homo. Some of that old sacred music splendid. Mercadante, 7 last words. Mozart's 12th Mass, Gloria and that. Those old popes keen on music, on art and statues and pictures of all kinds. Palestrina, for example, too. They had a gay old time while it lasted. Healthy too, chanting, regular hours, then Brulikers. Benedictine. Green chartreuse. Still, having eunuchs in their choir that was coming at a bit thick. What kind of voice is it? Must be curious to hear after their own strong basses. Connoisseurs. Suppose they wouldn't feel anything after. Kind of a placid. No worry. Fall into flesh, don't they? Gluttons, tall, long legs. Who knows? Eunuch. One way out of it. He saw the priest bend down and kiss the altar and then face about and bless all the people. All crossed themselves and stood up. Mr. Bloom glanced about him and then stood up, looking over the risen hats. Stand up at the gospel, of course. Then all settled down on their knees again and he sat back quietly in his bench. The priest came down from the altar, holding the thing up from him, and he and the masked boy answered each other in Latin. Then the priest knelt down and began to read off a card. "O God, our refuge and our strength." Mr. Bloom put his face forward to catch the words. English. "Throw them the bone." I remember slightly. "How long since your last mass?" "Glorious and Immaculate Virgin." "Joseph, her spouse." "Peter and Paul." "More interesting if you understood what it was all about." "Wonderful organization, certainly, goes like clockwork." "Confession." "Everyone wants to." "Then I will tell you all." "Penance." "Punish me, please." Great weapon in their hands. More than doctor or solicitor. Woman dying too. NISCHSCHSCHSCHSCHSCH. And did you check KKK? And why did you look down at her ring to find an excuse? Whispering gallery walls have ears. Husband learned to his surprise. God's little joke. Then out she comes. Repentance can deep. Lovely shame. Pray at an altar. Hail Mary and Holy Mary. Flowers, incense, candles melting. Hide her blushes. Salvation Army blatant imitation. Reformed prostitute will address the meeting. How I've found the Lord. Square-headed chaps those must be in Rome, they work the whole show. And don't they rake in the money too? Bequests also, to the pages for the time being at his absolute discretion. Masses for the repose of my soul to be said publicly with open doors. Monasteries and convents. The priest and that Fermanagh will case in the witness box. No browbeating him. He hid his answer pat for everything. Liberty and exaltation of our Holy Mother the Church. The doctors of the Church, they mapped out the whole theology of it. The priest prayed, "Blessed Michael, Archangel, defend us in the hour of conflict. Be our safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God restrain him, we humbly pray. And thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God thrust Satan down to hell and with him those other wicked spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls." The priest and the mass boy stood up and walked off. All over. The women remained behind, Thanksgiving. Better be shoving along. Brother Buzz. Come around with the plate perhaps. Pay your Easter duty. He stood up. Hello? Were those two buttons of my waistcoat open all the time? Women enjoy it. Never tell you. But we. Excuse, miss, there's a WHH. Just a WHH. Fluff. Or their skirt behind, placard unhooked. Glimpses of the moon. Annoyed if you don't. Why didn't you tell me before? Still like you better untidy. Good job it wasn't farther south. He passed, discreetly buttoning, down the aisle and out through the main door into the light. He stood a moment unseen by the cold black marble boa before him and behind two worshippers dipped furtive hands in a low tide of holy water. Trams, a car of Prescott's Dierks, a widow in her weeds. Notice because I'm in mourning myself. He covered himself. How goes the time? 1:15. Time enough yet. Better get the lotion made up. Where's this? Oh yes, the last time. Swainey's in Lincoln Place. Chemists rarely move. Their green and gold beacon is too heavy to stir. Hamilton Longs, founded in the year of the flood, Huguenot churchyard near there. Visit someday. He walked southward along Westland Road. But the recipe is in the other trousers. Oh, and I forgot that latchkey too. Aboard this funeral affair. Oh well, poor fellow, it's not his fault. When was it I got it made up last? Wait. I changed a sovereign, I remember. First of the month it must have been, or the second. Oh, he can look it up in the prescriptions book. The chemist turned back page after page. Sandy shriveled smell he seems to have. Shrunken skull. An old quest for the philosopher's stone. The alchemists. Drugs age you after mental excitement. Lethargy then. Why? Reaction. A lifetime in a night. Gradually changes your character. Living all the day among herbs, ointments, disinfectants. All his alabaster lily pots. Mortar and pestle. Act. District fold. Lower. TV. Smell almost cure you like the dentist's doorbell. Dr. Whack. He ought to physic himself a bit. Electuary or emulsion. The first fellow that picked an herb to cure himself had a bit of pluck. Simples. Want to be careful. Enough stuff here to chloroform. Test turns blue litmus paper red. Chloroform. Overdose of laudanum. Sleeping drafts. Blood filters. Paregoric poppy syrup bad for cough. Clogs the pores of the phlegm. Poison's the only cures. Remedy where you least expect it. Clever of nature. About a fortnight ago, sir. Yes, Mr. Bloom said. He waited by the counter, inhaling slowly the keen reek of drugs, the dusty dry smell of sponges and Leo fast. Lot of time taken up telling your aches and pains. Sweet almond oil and tincture of benzoin, Mr. Bloom said, and then orange flower water. It certainly did make her skin so delicate white like wax. And white wax also, he said, brings out the darkness of her eyes. Looking at me, the sheet up to her eyes, Spanish, smelling herself, when I was fixing the links in my cuffs. Those homely recipes are often the best. Strawberries for the teeth, nettles and rainwater, oatmeal they say steeped in buttermilk. Skin food. One of the old queen's sons, Duke of Albany was it? Had only one skin. Leopold, yes. 3 we have. Warts, bunions and pimples to make it worse. But you want a perfume too. What perfume is your Peau de Spain? That orange flower water is so fresh. Nice smell these soaps have. Pure curd soap. Time to get a bath around the corner. Hammond. Turkish. Massage. Dirt gets rolled up in your navel. Nicer if a nice girl did it. Also I think yes I do it in the bath. Curious longing I water to water. Combine business with pleasure. Pity no time for massage. Feel fresh then all the day. Funeral be rather glum. Yes, sir, the chemist said. That was 2 to 9. Have you brought a bottle? No, Mr. Bloom said. Make it up, please. I'll call later in the day and I'll take one of these soaps. How much are they? For pence, sir. Mr. Bloom raised a cake to his nostrils. Sweet ammonia wax. I'll take this one, he said. That makes 3 and a penny. Yes, sir, the chemist said. You can pay all together, sir, when you come back. Good, Mr. Bloom said. He strolled out of the shop, the newspaper baton under his armpit, the cool wrapper of soap in his left hand. At his armpit, Bantam Lion's voice and hand said, "Hello, Bloom. What's the best news? Is that the days? Show us a minute." Shaved off his mustache again, by Jove. Long cold upward lip. To look younger. He does look balmy. Younger than I am. Bantam Lion's yellow black-nailed fingers unrolled the baton. Once a wash too. Take off the rough dirt. Good morning, have you used Pear's soap? Dandruff on his shoulders. Scalp wants oiling. I want to see about that French horse that's running today, Bantam Lion said. Were the buggers up? He rustled the pleated pages, jerking his chin on his high collar. Barber zips. Tight collar, he'll lose his hair. Better leave him the paper and get shut of him. You can keep it, Mr. Bloom said. Ask what? Gold cup. Wait, Bantam Lions muttered. Half a mo. Maximum the second. I was just going to throw it away, Mr. Bloom said. Bantam Lions raised his eyes suddenly and leered weakly. What's the? His sharp voice said. I say you can keep it, Mr. Bloom answered. I was going to throw it away that moment. Bantam Lions doubted an instant, leering, then thrust the outspread sheets back on Mr. Bloom's arms. I'll risk it, he said. Here, thanks. He sped off towards Conway's corner. Godspeed, Scott. Mr. Bloom folded the sheets again to a neat square and lodged the soap in it, smiling. Silly lips of that chap. Betting. Regular hotbed of it lately. Messenger boys stealing to put on sixpence. Raffle for a large tender turkey. Your Christmas dinner for threepence. Jack Fleming embezzling to gamble, then smuggled off to America. Keeps a hotel now. They never come back. Flesh pots of Egypt. He walked cheerfully towards the mosque of the baths. Remind you of the mosque, red-baked bricks, the minarets. College sports today I see. He eyed a horseshoe poster over the gate of College Park, cyclists doubled up like a cod in a pot. Damn bad ad. Now if they had made it round like a wheel. Then the spokes, sports, and the whole big college. Something to catch the eye. There's Hornblower standing at the porter's lodge. Keep him on hands, might take a turn in there on the nod. How do you do, Mr. Hornblower? How do you do, sir? Heavenly weather really. If life was always like that. Cricket weather. Sit around under sunshades. Over after over. Out. They can't play it here. Dug for 6 wickets. Still Captain Culler broke a window in the Kildare Street Club with a slug to square leg. Donnybrook Fairmore in their line. In the skulls we rack-cracking when M. Carthy took the floor. Heat wave. Won't last. Always passing, the stream of life, which in the stream of life we trace is dearer than them all. Enjoy a bath now, clean trough of water, cool enamel, the gentle tepid stream. This is my body. He foresaw his pale body reclined in it full, naked, in the womb of warmth, oiled by scented melting soap, softly laved. He saw his trunk and limbs rippled over and sustained, buoyed lightly upward, lemon yellow, his navel, bud of flesh, and saw the dark tangled curls of his bush floating, floating hair of the stream around the limp father of thousands, a languid floating flower. Martin Cunningham, first, poked his silk-hatted head into the creaking carriage and, entering deftly, seated himself. Mr. Power stepped in after him, curving his height with care. "Come on, Simon." "Free," Mr. Bloom said. Mr. Delos covered himself quickly and got in, saying, "Yes, yes." "Are we all here now?" Martin Cunningham asked. "Come along, Bloom." Mr. Bloom entered and sat in the vacant place. He pulled the door after him and slammed it twice till it shut tight. He passed an arm through the arm strap and looked seriously from the open carriage window at the lowered blinds of the avenue. One dragged aside, an old woman peeping, nose white flattened against the pane. Thanking her stars she was passed over. Extraordinary the interest they take in a corpse. Glad to see us go, we give them such trouble coming. Jump seems to suit them. Hugger-mugger in corners. Slop about in slipper-slappers for fear he'd wake. And getting it ready. Laying it out. Molly and Mrs. Fleming making the bed. Pull it more to your side. Our winding sheet. Never know who will touch you that. Wash and shampoo. I believe they clip the nails in the hair. Keep a bit in an envelope. Grows all the same after. Unclean job. All waited. Nothing was said. Stowing in the wreaths probably. I am sitting on something hard. Ah, that soap, in my hip pocket. Better shift it out of that. Wait for an opportunity. All waited. Then wheels were heard from in front, turning, then nearer, then horses' hooves. A jolt. Their carriage began to move, creaking and swaying. Other hooves and creaking wheels started behind. The blinds of the avenue passed to number 9 with its crate knocker, door ajar. At walking pace. They waited still, their knees jogging, till they had turned and were passing along the tramp racks. Tritonville Road. Quicker. The wheels rattled rolling over the cobble causeway and the crazy glasses shook rattling in the door frames. What way is he taking us? Mr. Power asked through both windows. Irishtown, Martin Cunningham said. Ringsend. Brunswick Street. Mr. Delos nodded, looking out. That's a fine old custom, he said. I am glad to see it has not died out. I'll watch a while through their windows, caps and hats lifted by passers. Respect. The carriage swerved from the tram track to the smoother road past Watery Lane. Mr. Bloom at gaze saw a lithe young man, clad in mourning, a wide hat. There's a friend of yours gone by, Daedalus, he said. Who was that? Your son and heir. Where's he? Mr. Daedalus said, stretching over across the carriage, passing the open drains and mounted repeating railway before the tenement houses, lurched round the corner and, swerving back to the tram track, rolled on noisily with chattering wheels. Mr. Daedalus fell back, saying, was that Mulligan Cad with him? His fiddlesackets. No, Mr. Bloom said. He was alone. Down with his Aunt Sally, I suppose, Mr. Daedalus said. The Goulding faction, the drunken little cost drawer and Chrissy, Papa's little lump of dough, the wise child that knows her own father. Mr. Bloom smiled joyously on Ringsend Road. Wallace Bros, the Bottle Works, Dotterbridge. Richie Goulding and the legal bag. Goulding, calls and Ward he calls the firm. His jokes are getting a bit damp. Great card he was. Waltzing in Stamer Street with Ignatius Gallagher on a Sunday morning, the landlady's two hats pinned on his head. Out on the rampage all night. Beginning to tell on him now, that backache of his, I fear. Wi-Fi earning his back. Thinks he'll cure it with pills. All breadcrumbs there are. About 600% profit. He's in with the low-down crowd, Mr. Deal snarled. That mulligan is a contaminated bloody double-deed ruffian by all accounts. His name stinks all over Dublin. But with the help of God and his blessed mother, I'll make it my business to write a letter one of those days to his mother or his aunt or whatever she is that will open her eye as wide as a gate. I'll tickle his catastrophe, believe you me. He cried above the clatter of the wheels, I won't have a bastard of a nephew ruin my son. A counter-jumper's son. Selling tapes in my cousin, Peter Paul M. Swanee's. Not likely. He ceased. Mr. Bloom glanced from his angry mustache to Mr. Power's mild face and Martin Cunningham's eyes and beard, gravely shaking. Noisy, self-willed man. Full of his son. He is right. Something to hand on. If little Rudy had lived. See him grow up. Hear his voice in the house. Walking beside Molly in an Eton suit. My son. Meant his eyes. Strange feeling it would be. For me. Just a chance. Must have been that morning in Raymond Terrace she was at the window watching the two dogs at it by the wall of the cease to do evil. And the sergeant grinning up. She had that cream gown on with the rip she never stitched. Give us a touch, Poldy. God, I'm dying for it. How life begins. Got big then. Had to refuse the Greystones concert. My son inside her. I could have helped him on in life. I could make him independent. Learn German too. Are we late? Mr. Power asked. 10 minutes, Martin Cunningham said, looking at his watch. Molly. Millie. Same thing watered down. Her tomboyos. Oh, jumping Jupiter. Ye gods and little fishes. Still, she's a dear girl. Soon be a woman. Mullinger. Dearest Papley. Young student. Yes, yes, a woman too. Life, life. The carriage heeled over and back, their four trunks swaying. Corny might have given us a more commodious yoke, Mr. Power said. He might, Mr. Dealis said, if he hadn't that squint troubling him. Do you follow me? He closed his left eye. Martin Cunningham began to brush away crust crumbs from under his thighs. What is this? He said, in the name of God. Crumbs. Someone seems to have been making a picnic party here lately, Mr. Power said. All raised their thighs and eyed with disfavor the mildewed buttonless leather of the seats. Mr. Dealis, twisting his nose, frowned downward and said, unless I am greatly mistaken. What do you think, Martin? It struck me too, Martin Cunningham said. Mr. Bloom set his thigh down. Glad I took the bath. Feel my feet quite clean. But I wish Mrs. Fleming had darned these socks better. Mr. D sighed resignedly. After all, he said, it's the most natural thing in the world. Did Tom Kernan turn up? Martin Cunningham asked, twirling the peak of his beard gently. Yes, Mr. Bloom answered. He's behind with Ned Lambert and Hines. And Corny killed her himself. Mr. Power asked. At the cemetery, Martin Cunningham said. I met McCoy this morning, Mr. Bloom said. He said he'd tried to come. The carriage halted short. What's wrong? We're stopped. Where are we? Mr. Bloom put his head out of the window. The Grand Canal, he said. Gasworks. Whooping cough, they say it cures. Good John Millie never got it. Poor children. Doubles them up black and blue in convulsions. Shame really. Got off lightly with illnesses compared. Only measles, flaxity, scarlatina, influenza epidemics. Canvassing for death. Don't miss this chance. Dog's home over there. Poor old Athos. Be good to Athos, Leopold, is my last wish. Thy will be done. We obey them in the grave. A dying scrawl. He took it to heart, pinned away. Quiet brute. Old men's dogs usually are. A raindrop spat on his hat. He drew back and saw an instant of shower spray dots over the gray flags. Apart. Curious. Like through a colander. I thought it would. My boots were creaking, I remember now. The weather's changing, he said quietly. A pity it did not keep up fine, Martin Cunningham said. Wanted for the country, Mr. Powers said. There's the sun again coming out. Mr. Ulysses, peering through his glasses towards the veiled sun, hurled a mute curse at the sky. It's as uncertain as a child's bottom, he said. We're off again. The carriage turned again, its stiff wheels and their trunks swayed gently. Martin Cunningham twirled more quickly the peak of his beard. Tom Kernan was immense last night, he said. And Pat Leonard taking him off to his face. Oh, draw him out, Martin, Mr. Powers said eagerly. Wait till you hear him, Simon, on Ben Dollard singing of the Crappie Boy. Immense, Martin Cunningham said pompously. His singing of that simple ballad, Martin, is the most trenchant rendering I ever heard in the whole course of my experience. Trenchant, Mr. Powers said laughing. He's dead nuts on that. And the retrospective arrangement. Did you read Dan Dawson's speech? Martin Cunningham asked. I did not then, Mr. Ulysses said. Where's it? In the paper this morning. Mr. Bloom took the paper from his inside pocket. That book I must change for her. No, Mr. Ulysses said quickly. Later on, please. Mr. Bloom's glance traveled down the edge of the paper, scanning the deaths, Callan, Coleman, Dignan, Fawcett, Lowry, Nauman, Peake. What Peake is that? Is it the chap was in Crosby and Allane's? No, Sexton, or Bright. Think characters fast fading on the frayed breaking paper. Thinks to the little flower. Sadly missed. To the inexpressible grief of his aged 88 after long and tedious illness. Months mine, Quinlan. On whose soul sweet Jesus have mercy. It is now a month since dear Henry fled to his home up above in the sky while his family weeps and mourns his loss, hoping someday to meet him on high. I tore up the envelope. Yes. Where did I put her letter after I read it in the bath? He patted his waistcoat pocket. They're all right. Dear Henry fled. Before my patients are exhausted. National School. Meads Yard. The Hazard. Only two there now. Nodding. Full as a tick. Too much bone in their skulls. The other trotting around with the fair. An hour ago I was passing there. The Jarvies raised their hats. The policeman's back straightened itself upright suddenly against a tramway standard by Mr. Bloom's window. Couldn't they invent something automatic so that the wheel itself much handier? Well, but that fellow would lose his job then. Well, but then another fellow would get a job making the new invention. Ancient concert rooms. Nothing on there. A man in a buff suit with a crepe armlet. Not much grief there. Quarter morning. People in law perhaps. They went past the bleak pulpit of St. Mark's, under the railway bridge, past the Queen's Theatre, in silence. Hoardings, Eugene Stratton, and Mrs. Bandman Palmer. Could I go to see Leah tonight, I wonder? I said out of the Lily of Killarney. Elster Grimes Opera Company. Big powerful change. Whitbright bills for next week. Fun on the Bristol. Martin Cunningham could work a pass for the Gaiety. Have to stand a drink or two. As broad as it's long. He's coming in the afternoon. Her songs. Plastos. Sir Philip Crampton's memorial fountain bust. Who was he? How do you do? Martin Cunningham said, raising his palm to his brow in salute. He doesn't see us, Mr. Powers said. Yes, he does. How do you do? Who? Mr. Dealis asked. Blazes boiling, Mr. Powers said. There he is airing his quiff. Just that moment I was thinking. Mr. Dealis bent across his salute. From the door of the Red Bank the white disc of a straw hat flashed reply, spruce figure, past. Mr. Bloom reviewed the nails of his left hand, then those of his right hand. The nails, yes. Is there anything more in him that they should see? Fascination. Worst man in Dublin. That keeps him alive. They sometimes feel what a person is. Instinct. But a type like that. My nails. I am just looking at them, well paired. And after, thinking alone. Body getting a bit softy. I would notice that, from remembering. What causes that? I suppose the skin can't contract quickly enough when the flesh falls off. But the shape is there. The shape is there still. Shoulders. Hips. Plump. Night of the dance dressing. Shift stuck between the cheeks behind. He clasped his hands between his knees and, satisfied, sent his vacant glance over their faces. Mr. Power asked, how is the concert tour getting on, Bloom? Oh, very well, Mr. Bloom said. I hear great accounts of it. It's a good idea, you see. Are you going yourself? Well, no, Mr. Bloom said. In point of fact, I have to go down to the County Clare on some private business. You see, the idea is to tour the chief towns. What you lose on one you can make up on the other. Quite so, Martin Cunningham said. Mary Anderson is up there now. Have you good artists? Louis Werner is touring her, Mr. Bloom said. Oh yes, we'll have all top knobbers. J.C. Dowell and John McCormick I hope, and the best, in fact. And madam, Mr. Power said smiling. Last but not least. Mr. Bloom unclasped his hands in a gesture of soft politeness and clasped them. Smith O'Brien. Someone has laid a bunch of flowers there. Woman. Must be his duty. For many happy returns. The carrot wheeling by Pharaoh's statue united noiselessly their unresisting knees. Oh, the dull-garbed old man from the curbstone timbered his wares, his mouth opening, ooh, 4 bootlaces for a penny. Wonder why he was struck off the rolls. Had his office on Hume Street. Same house as Molly's namesake, Tweedy, cried solicitor for Waterford. Has that silk hat ever since. Relics of old decency. Mourning too. Terrible come down, poor Ed. Kicking about like snuffed away. O'Callahan on his last legs. And Madden. 11:20. Up. Mrs. Fleming is Indy clean. Doing her hair, humming. Voglioing on Vore. No. Voreing on. Looking at the tips of her hairs to see if they're split. Me treno un poco. Beautiful on that turn her voice is, weeping tone. A thrush. A throstle. There's a word throstle that expresses that. His eyes passed lightly over Mr. Power's good-looking face. Grayish over the ears. Madam, smiling. I smiled back. A smile goes a long way. Only politeness, perhaps. Nice fellow. Who knows is that true about the woman he keeps? Not pleasant for the wife. Yet they say, who was it told me, there's no cardinal. You would imagine it would get played out pretty quick. Yes, it was Crofton met him one evening bringing her a pound of rump steak. What is this she was? Barmaid and juries. Or the Mara, was it? They passed under the huge cloak Liberator's form. Martin Cunningham nudged Mr. Power. Of the tribe of Reuben, he said. A tall black-bearded figure, bent on a stick, stumping around the corner of Elvery's elephant house, showed them a curved hand open on his spine. In all his pristine beauty, Mr. Power said. Mr. Delos looked after the stumping figure and said mildly, the devil break the hasp of your back. Mr. Power, collapsing in laughter, shaded his face from the window as the carriage passed Gray's statue. We have all been there, Martin Cunningham said broadly. His eyes met Mr. Bloom's eyes. He caressed his beard, adding, well, nearly all of us. Mr. Bloom began to speak with sudden eagerness to his companions' faces. That's an awfully good one that's going the rounds about Reuben J. and the Son. About the boatman. Mr. Power asked. Yes. Isn't it awfully good? What is that? Mr. Delos asked. I didn't hear it. There was a girl in the case, Mr. Bloom began, and he determined to send him to the Isle of Man out of harm's way, but when they were both. What? Mr. Delos asked. That confirmed bloody her bledo, is it? Yes, Mr. Bloom said. They were both on the way to the boat and he tried to drown. Drown Barabbas? Mr. Delos cried. I wish the Christ he did. Mr. Power sent a long laugh down his shaded nostrils. No, Mr. Bloom said, the Son himself. Martin Cunningham thwarted his speech rudely. Reuben and the Son were packing it down the quay next the river on their way to the Isle of Man boat, and the young Chancellor suddenly got loose and over the wall with him into the Lafitte. For God's sake! Mr. Delos exclaimed in fright. Is he dead? Dead? Martin Cunningham cried. Not he. A boatman got a pole and fished him out by the slack of the breeches, and he was landed up to the father on the quay more dead than alive. Half the town was there. Yes, Mr. Bloom said. But the funny part is. And Reuben J., Martin Cunningham said, gave the boatman a florin for saving his son's life. A stifled sigh came from under Mr. Power's hand. Oh, he did, Martin Cunningham affirmed. Like a hero. a silver florin. Isn't single quote tea it awfully good? Mr. Bloom said eagerly. 1 and 8 pence too much, Mr. Dealis said drearily. Mr. Power's choked laugh burst quietly in the carriage. Nelson's pillar. 8 plums a penny. 8 for a penny. We had better look a little serious, Martin Cunningham said. Mr. Dealis sighed. Ah, then indeed, he said. Poor little Patty wouldn't grudge us a laugh. Many a good one, he told himself. The Lord forgive me, Mr. Power said, wiping his wet eyes with his fingers. Poor Patty. I little thought a week ago when I saw him last he was in his usual health that I'd be driving after him like this. He's gone from us. As decent a little man as ever wore a hat, Mr. Dealis said. It went very suddenly. Breakdown, Martin Cunningham said. Heart. He tapped his chest sadly. Blazing face, red hot. Too much John Barleycorn. Cure for a red nose. Drink like the devil till it turns out light. A lot of money he spent coloring it. Mr. Power gazed at the passing houses with rueful apprehension. He hit a sudden death, poor fellow, he said. The best death, Mr. Bloom said. Their wide-open eyes looked at him. No suffering, he said. A moment and all is over. Like dying in sleep. No one spoke. Dead side of the street this. Dull business by day, land agents, temperance hotel, Falconer's Railway Guide, Civil Service College, Gills, Catholic Club, the industrious blind. Why? Some reason. Sun or wind. At night too. Chummies and Slaves. Under the patronage of the late Father Matthew. Foundation stone for Parnell. Breakdown. Heart. White horses with white frontlet plumes came round the rotunda corner, galloping. A tiny coffin flashed by. In a hurry to bury. A mourning coach. Unmarried. Black for the married. Piebald for bachelors. Done for a nun. Sad, Martin Cunningham said. A child. A dwarf's face, moth and wrinkled like little Rudy's was. Dwarf's body, weak as putty, in a white-lined dill box. Veritable friendly society pays. Penny a week for solid turf. Little. Bigger. Baby. Meant nothing. Mistake of nature. If it's healthy, it's from the mother. If not from the man. Better luck next time. Poor little thing, Mr. Dealis said. It's well out of it. The carriage climbed more slowly the hill of Rutland Square. Rattle his bones. Over the stones. Only a pauper. Nobody owns. In the midst of life, Martin Cunningham said. But the worst of all, Mr. Power said, is the man who takes his own life. Martin Cunningham drew out his watch briskly, coughed and put it back. The greatest disgrace to have in the family, Mr. Power added. Temporary insanity, of course, Martin Cunningham said decisively. We must take a charitable view of it. They say a man who does it is a coward, Mr. Dealis said. It is not for us to judge, Martin Cunningham said. Mr. Bloom, about to speak, closed his lips again. Martin Cunningham's large eyes, looking away now. Sympathetic human man he is. Intelligent. Like Shakespeare's face. Always a good word to say. They have no mercy on that hero infanticide. Refused Christian burial. They used to drive a stake of wood through his heart in the grave, as if it wasn't broken already. Yet sometimes they're pinned too late, found in the river clutching rushes. He looked at me, and that awful drunkard of a wife of his, setting up house for her time after time and then pawning the furniture on him every Saturday almost, leading him the life of the damned. Wear the heart out of a stone, that Monday morning. Start afresh. Shoulder to the wheel. Lord, she must have looked a sight that night. Ulysses told me he was in there, drunk about the place and capering with Martin's umbrella. And they call me the jewel of Asia, the geisha. He looked away from me. He knows. Rattle his bones. That afternoon of the inquest. The red-labeled bottle on the table. The room in the hotel with hunting pictures. Stuffy it was. Sunlight through the slats of the Venetian blind. The coroner's son with ears, big and hairy. Boots giving evidence. Thought he was asleep first, then saw like yellow streaks on his face. Had slipped down to the foot of the bed. Verdict, overdose. Death by misadventure. The letter. For my son Leopold. No more pain. Wake no more. Nobody owns. The carriage rattled swiftly along Blessington Street. Over the stones. We're going the pace, I think, Martin Cunningham said. God grant he doesn't upset us on the road, Mr. Powers said. I hope not, Martin Cunningham said. That will be a great race tomorrow in Germany. The Gordon Bennett. Yes, by Jove, Mr. Ulysses said. That will be worth seeing, Faith. As they turned into Berkeley Street, a street organ near the basin sent over and after them a rollicking, rattling song of the halls. Has anybody here seen Kelly? Kelly. Dead March from Saul. He's as bad as old Antonio. He left me on my ownio. Barrette. The Mater Misericordia. Eccles Street. My house down there. Big place. Ward for incurables there. Very encouraging. Our Lady's Hospice for the dying. Dead house handy underneath. Where old Mrs. Reardon died. They look terrible, the women. Her feeding cup and rubbing her mouth with a spoon. Then the screen round her bed for her to die. Nice young student that was dressed up by the bee gave me. He's gone over to the lying-in hospital, they told me. From one extreme to the other. The carriage galloped round a corner, stopped. What's wrong now? A divider drove of branded cattle past the windows, lowing, slouching by on padded hooves, whisking their tails slowly on their clotted bony croups. Outside them through them ran raided sheep bleating their fear. Immigrants, Mr. Powers said. Pew. The drover's voice cried, his switch sounding on their flanks. Pew. Out of that. Thursday, of course. Tomorrow is killing day. Springers. Cuff sold them about 27 quid each. For Liverpool probably. Roast beef for Old England. The buyout bought juicy ones. And then the fifth quarter lost, all that raw stuff, hide, hair, horns. Comes to a big thing in a year. Dead meat trade. Byproducts of the slaughterhouses for tanneries, soap, margarine. Wonder if that dodge works now, getting dicky meat off the train at Clonsilla. The carriage moved on through the drove. I can't make out why the corporation doesn't run a tram line from the park gate to the quays, Mr. Bloom said. All those animals could be taken in trucks down to the boats, instead of blocking up the thoroughfare, Martin Cunningham said. Quite right. They ought to. Yes, Mr. Bloom said, and another thing I often thought is to have municipal funeral trams like they have in Milan, you know. Run the line out to the cemetery gates and have special trams, hearse and carriage and all. Don't you see what I mean? Oh, that'd be damned for a story, Mr. Ulysses said. Pullman car in the saloon dining room. A pulled lookout for Corny, Mr. Power added. Why? Mr. Bloom asked, turning to Mr. Ulysses. Wouldn't it be more decent than galloping two abreast? Well, there's something in that, Mr. Ulysses grinned. And, Martin Cunningham said, we wouldn't have scenes like that when the hearse capsized around Dumfries and upset the coffin onto the road. That was terrible, Mr. Power's shocked face said, and the corpse fell about the road. Terrible. First around Dumfries, Mr. Ulysses said, nodding. Goward and Bennett cut. Praises be to God. Martin Cunningham said piously. Bomb. Upset. A coffin bumped out onto the road. Burst open. Paddy Dignam shot out and rolling over stiff in the dust in a brown habit too large for him. Red-faced, gray now. Mouth fallen open. Asking what's up now. Quite right to close it. Looks horrid open. Then the insides decomposed quickly. Much better to close up on the orifices. Yes, also. With wax. The sphincter loose. Seal up all. Dumfries, Mr. Power announced as the carriage turned right. Dumfries Corner. Mourning coaches drawn up, drowning their grief. Applause by the wayside. Tip-top position for a pub. Expect we'll pull up here on the way back to drink his health. Pass round the consolation. Elixir of life. But suppose now it had happened. Would he bleed if a nail say cut him in the knocking about? He would and he wouldn't, I suppose. Depends on where the circulation stops. Still some might do that in artery. It would be better to bury them in red, a dark red. In silence they drove along Phipsborough Road. An empty hearse trotted by, coming from the cemetery, looks relieved. Cross Guns Bridge, the Royal Canal. Water rushed roaring through the sluices. A man stood on his dropping barge, between clamps of turf. On the towpath by the log a slack-tethered horse. Aboard of the bugaboo. Their eyes watched him. On the slow weedy waterway he had floated on his raft coastward over Ireland, drawn by a haulage rope past beds of reeds, over slime, mud-choked bottles, carrion dogs. At Lone, Mullingar, Moa Valley, I could make a walking tour to see a Millie by the canal. Or cycle down. Hire some old crock, safety. Ren had one the other day at the auction but a ladies. Developing waterways. James M. Can's hobby to row me over the ferry. Cheaper transit. By easy stages. Houseboats. Camping out. Also hearses. To heaven by water. Perhaps I will without riding. Come as a surprise, leak slip, Clonsilla. Dropping down lock by lock to Dublin. With her from the Midland bogs. Salute. He lifted his brown straw hat, saluting Paddy Dignam. They drove on past Brian Miroim house. Near it now. I wonder how is our friend Fogarty getting on, Mr. Power said. Better ask Tom Kernan, Mr. Dealer said. How is that? Martin Cunningham said. Left him weeping, I suppose. No loss to sight, Mr. Dealer said, to memory dear. The carriage steered left for Finglas Road. The stonecutter's yard on the right. Last lap. Crowded on the spit of land, silent shapes appeared, white, sorrowful, holding up calm hands, knelt in grief, pointing. Fragments of shapes, hewn. And white silence, appealing. The best obtainable. Thomas H. Denny, monumental builder and sculptor. Passed. On the curbstone before Jimmy Geary, the sexton's, an old tramp sat, grumbling, emptying the dirt and stones out of his huge dust-brown yawning boot. After life's journey, gloomy gardens then went by one, gloomy houses. Mr. Power pointed. That is where Childs was murdered, he said. The last house. So it is, Mr. Dealer said. A gruesome case. Seemed Bush got him off. Murdered his brother. Or so they said. The Crown had no evidence, Mr. Power said. Only circumstantial, Martin Cunningham added. That's the maxim of the law. Better for 19 guilty to escape than for one innocent person to be wrongfully condemned. They looked. Murder's ground. It passed darkly. Shuttered, tenantless, unweeded garden. Whole place gone to hell. Wrongfully condemned. Murder. The murderer's image in the eye of the murdered. They love reading about it. Man's head found in a garden. Her clothing consisted of. How she met her death. Recent outrage. The weapon used. Murderer still at large. Clues. A shoelace. The body to be exhumed. Murder without. Cramped in his carriage. She mightn't like me to come that way without letting her know. Must be careful about women. Catch them once with their pants down. Never forgive you after. 15. The high railings of Prospect rippled past their gaze. Dark poplars, rare white forms. Forms more frequent, white shapes thronged amid the trees, white forms and fragments streaming by mutely, sustaining vain gestures on the air. The felly harshhead against the curbstone stopped. Martin Cunningham put out his arm and, wrenching back the handle, shoved the door open with his knee. He stepped out. Mr. Power and Mr. Dealis followed. Change that soap now. Mr. Bloom's hand unbuttoned his hip pocket swiftly and transferred the paper-stuck soap to his inner handkerchief pocket. He stepped out of the carriage, replacing the newspaper his other hand still held. Paltry funeral, coach and 3 carriages. It's all the same. Pall bearers, gold reins, requiem mass, firing a volley. Plump of death. Beyond the hind carriage a hawker stood by his barrow of cakes and fruit. Seminal cakes those are, stuck together, cakes for the dead. Dog biscuits. Who ate them? Mourners coming out. He followed his companions. Mr. Kernan and Ned Lambert followed, Hines walking after them. Corny Kelleher stood by the open hearse and took out the 2 wreaths. He handed one to the boy. Where's that child's funeral disappear to? A team of horses passed from Finglas with toiling, plodding tread, dragging through the funereal silence a creaking wagon on which lay a granite block. The wagoner marching at their head saluted. Coffin now. Got here before us, dead as he is. Horse looking round at it with his plumed scallywways. dull eye, collar tight on his neck, pressing on a blood vessel or something. Do they know what they carved out here every day? Must be 20 or 30 funerals every day. In Mount Jerome for the Protestants. Funerals all over the world, everywhere, every minute. Shoveling them under by the cartload, double quick. Thousands every hour. Too many in the world. Mourners came out through the gates, woman and a girl. Leanne-jawed harpy, hard woman at the bargain, her bonnet awry. Girl's face stained with dirt and tears, holding the woman's arm, looking up at her for sign to cry. Fish's face, bloodless and livid. The mute shouldered the coffin and borrowed in through the gates. So much dead weight. Felt heavier myself stepping out of the bath. First the stiff, then the friends of the stiff. Corny killed her and the boa followed with their wreaths. Who was that beside them? Ah, the brother-in-law. All walked after. Martin Cunningham whispered, I was in mortal agony with you talking of suicide before Bloom. What? Mr. Power whispered. How so? His father poisoned himself, Martin Cunningham whispered. Had the Queen's Hotel in Ennis. You heard him say he was going to Clare. Anniversary. Oh God, Mr. Power whispered. First I heard of it. Poisoned himself. He glanced behind him to where a face with dark thinking eyes followed towards the Cardinal's mausoleum. Speaking. Was he insured? Mr. Bloom asked. I believe so, Mr. Kernan answered. But the policy was heavily mortgaged. Martin is trying to get the youngster into Orton. How many children did he leave? 5. Ned Lambert says he'll try to get one of the girls into Todd's. A sad case, Mr. Bloom said gently. 5 young children. A great blow to the poor wife, Mr. Kernan added. Indeed yes, Mr. Bloom agreed. Has the laugh at him now. He looked down at the boots he had blacked and polished. She had outlived him. Lost her husband. More dead for her than for me. One must outlive the other. Wise men say. There are more women than men in the world. Condole with her. Your terrible loss. I hope you'll soon follow him. For Hindi widows only. She would marry another. Him. No. Yet who knows after. Widow would not the thing since the old queen died. Drawn on a gun carriage. Victoria and Albert. Frogmore Memorial Morning. But in the end she put a few violets in her bonnet. Vain in her heart of hearts. All for a shadow. Consort not even a king. Her son was the substance. Something new to hope for, not like the past she wanted back, waiting. It never comes. One must go first, alone, under the ground, and lie no more in her warm bed. How are you, Simon? Ned Lambert said softly, clasping hands. Haven't seen you for a month of Sundays. Never better. How are all in Cork's own town? I was down there for the Cork Park races on Easter Monday, Ned Lambert said. Same old 6 and 8 pence. Stopped with Dick Tivy. And how is Dick, the solid man? Nothing between himself and heaven, Ned Lambert answered. By the Holy Paul. Mr. Ulysses said in subdued wonder. Dick Tivy bawled. Martin is going to get up a whip for the youngsters, Ned Lambert said, pointing ahead. A few bob's skull. Just to keep them going till the insurance is cleared up. Yes, yes, Mr. Ulysses said dubiously. Is that the eldest boy in front? Yes, Ned Lambert said, with the wife's brother. John Henry Menton is behind. He put down his name for a quid. I'll engage he did, Mr. Ulysses said. I often told poor Paddy he ought to mind the job. John Henry is not the worst in the world. How did he lose it? Ned Lambert asked. Liquor, what? Many a good man's fault, Mr. Ulysses said with a sigh. They halted about the door of the mortuary chapel. Mr. Bloom stood behind the boy with the wreath, looking down at his sleek combed hair and at the slender furrowed neck inside his brand-new collar. Poor boy. Was he there when the father? Both unconscious. Lighten up at the last moment and recognize for the last time all he might have done. I owe 3 shillings to O'Grady. Would he understand? The mutes bore the coffin into the chapel. Which end is his head? After a moment he followed the others in, blinking in the screen light. The coffin lay on its bier before the chancel, 4 tall yellow candles at its corners. Always in front of us, Corny Kelleher, playing a wreath at each 4 corner, beckoned to the boy to kneel. The mourners knelt here and there in praying desks. Mr. Bloom stood behind near the font and, when all had knelt, dropped carefully his unfolded newspaper from his pocket and knelt his right knee upon it. He fitted his black hat gently on his left knee and, holding its brim, bent over piously. A server bearing a brass bucket with something in it came out through a door. The white smocked priest came after him, tidying his stole with one hand, balancing with the other a little book against his toad's belly. Who'll read the book? I, said the rook. They halted by the bier and the priest began to read out of his book with a fluent croak. Father Coffee. I knew his name was like a coffin. Dominion Ramen. Bully about the muzzle he looks. Bosses the show. Muscular Christian. Won't betide anyone that looks crooked at him, priest. Thou art Peter. Burst sideways like a sheep in clover, Dela says he will. With a belly on him like a poisoned pup. Most amusing expressions that man finds. HHHN, burst sideways. Non enters in judicem cum servoto, domini. Makes them feel more important to be prayed over in Latin. Requiem Mass. Crate weepers. Blackage note paper. Your name on the altar list. Chilly place this. Want to feed well, sitting in there all the morning in the gloom kicking his heels waiting for the next please. Eyes of a toe too. What swells him up that way? Molly gets swelled after cabbage. Air of the place maybe. Looks full up of bad gas. Must be an infernal lot of bad gas round the place. Butchers, for instance, they get like raw beef steaks. Who was telling me? Mervyn Brown. Down in the vaults of St. Werburgh's lovely old Oregon 150 they have to bore a hole in the coffin sometimes to let out the bad gas and burn it. Out it rushes, blue. One whiff of that and you're goner. My kneecap is hurting me. Oh, that's better. The priest took a stick with a knob at the end of it out of the boy's bucket and shook it over the coffin. Then he walked to the other end and shook it again. Then he came back and put it back in the bucket. As you were before you rested. It's all written down, he has to do it. Yet in the nose and duke is in temptation. The server piped the answers in the treble. I often thought it would be better to have boy servants. Up to 15 or so. After that, of course. Holy water that was, I expect. Shaking sleep out of it. He must be fed up with that job, shaking the thing over all the corpses that trot up. What harm if he could see what he was shaking it over? Every mortal day a fresh batch, middle-aged men, old women, children, women dead in childbirth, men with beards, bald-headed businessmen, consumptive girls with little sparrows' breasts. All the year round he prayed the same thing over them all and shook water on top of them. Sleep. On dignum now. In paradisum. Said he was going to paradise or is in paradise. Says over everybody. Tiresome kind of a job. But he has to say something. The priest closed his book and went off, followed by the server. Corny Kelleher opened the side doors and the gravediggers came in, hoisted the coffin again, carried it out and shoved it on their cart. Corny Kelleher gave one wreath to the boy and one to the brother-in-law. All followed them out of the side doors into the mild gray air. Mr. Bloom came last, folding his paper again into his pocket. He gazed gravely at the ground till the coffin cart wheeled off to the left. The metal wheels ground the gravel with a sharp grating cry and the packed blunt boots followed the trundle barrow along a lane of sepulchres. The wreather, the roo. Lord, I mustn't lilt here. The O'Connell circle, Mr. Delos said about him. Mr. Power's soft eyes went up to the apex of the lofty cone. He's at rest, he said, in the middle of his people, old Dan Oak. But his heart is buried in Rome. How many broken hearts are buried here, Simon? Her grave is over there, Jack, Mr. Delos said. I'll soon be stretched beside her. Let him take me whenever he likes. Breaking down, he began to weep to himself quietly, stumbling a little in his walk. Mr. Power took his arm. She's better where she's, he said kindly. I suppose so, Mr. Delos said with a weak gasp. I suppose she's in heaven if there is a heaven. Corny Kelleher stepped aside from his rank and allowed the mourners to plod by. Sad occasions, Mr. Kernan began politely. Mr. Bloom closed his eyes and sadly twice bowed his head. The others are putting on their hats, Mr. Kernan said. I suppose we can do so too. We're the last. This cemetery is a treacherous place. They covered their heads. The reverend gentleman read the service too quickly, don't you think? Mr. Kernan said with reproof. Mr. Bloom nodded gravely, looking in the quick bloodshot eyes. Secret eyes, secret searching. Mason, I think, not sure. Beside him again. We're the last. In the same boat. Hope he'll say something else. Mr. Kernan added, the service at the Irish church used in Mount Jerome is simpler, more impressive I must say. Mr. Bloom gave prudent assent. The language of chorus was another thing. Mr. Kernan said with solemnity, I am the resurrection and the life. That touches a man's inmost heart. It does, Mr. Bloom said. Your heart perhaps, but what price the fellow in the 6 feet by 2 with his toast to the daisies? No touching that. Seed of the affections. Broken heart. A pump after all, pumping thousands of gallons of blood every day. One fine day it gets bunged up, and there you are. Lots of them lying around here, lungs, hearts, livers. Old rusty pumps, damned if thing else. The resurrection and the life. Once you are dead, you are dead. That last day idea. Knocking them all up out of their graves. Come forth, Lazarus. And he came fifth and lost the job. Get up. Last day. Then every fellow mousing around for his liver and his lights and the rest of his traps. found a damn all of himself that morning. Pennyweight of powder in a skull. 12 grams 1 pennyweight. Troy measure. Corny Kelleher fell into step at their side. Everything went off A1, he said. What? He looked on them from his drawling eye. Policeman's shoulders. With your torilum. As it should be, Mr. Colonel said. What? Eh? Corny Kelleher said. Mr. Colonel assured him. Who was that chap behind with Tom Kernan? John Henry Menton asked. I know his face. Ned Lambert glanced back. Bloom, he said. Madam Marion Tweedy that was, the soprano. She's his wife. Oh, to be sure, John Henry Menton said. I haven't seen her for some time. He was a fine-looking woman. I danced with her, 15-17 golden years ago, at Matt Dillon's in Round Town. And a good armful she was. He looked behind through the others. What is he? He asked. What does he do? Wasn't he in the stationery line? I fell foul of him one evening, I remember, at Bowles. Ned Lambert smiled. Yes, he was, he said, and wisdom please. A traveler for blotting paper. In God's name, General Menton said, what did she marry a coon like that for? She had plenty of game in her then. Have still, Ned Lambert said. He does some canvassing for ads. John Henry Menton's large eyes stared ahead. The barrow turned into a side lane. A portly man, ambushed among the grasses, raised his hat in homage. The cavaliers touched their caps. John O'Connell, Mr. Powers said pleased. He never forgets a friend. Mr. O'Connell shook all their hands in silence. Mr. Delos said, I am come to pay you another visit. My dear Simon, the caretaker answered in a low voice. I don't want your custom at all. Saluting Ned Lambert and John Henry Menton, he walked on at Martin Cunningham's side, puzzling 2 long keys at his back. Did you hear the one, he asked them, about Mulcahy from the coon? I did not, Martin Cunningham said. They bent their silk hats in concert, and Hines inclined his ear. The caretaker hung his thumbs in the loops of his gold watch chain and spoke in a discreet tone to their vacant smiles. They tell the story, he said, that 2 drunks came out here one foggy evening to look for the grave of a friend of theirs. They asked for Mulcahy from the coombe and were told where he was buried. After traipsing about in the fog, they found the grave sure enough. One of the drunks spelled out the name, Terence Mulcahy. The other drunk was blinking up at the statue of our Savior the widow had got put up. The caretaker blinked up at one of the sepulchres they passed. He resumed, and, after blinking up at the sacred figure, not a bloody bit like the man, says he. That's not Mulcahy, says he, whoever done it. Rewarded by smiles, he fell back and spoke with Corny Kelleher, accepting the documents given him, turning them over and scanning them as he walked. That's all done with a purpose, Martin Cunningham explained to Hines. I know, Hines said. I know that. To cheer a fellow up, Martin Cunningham said. It's pure good-heartedness, damn the thing else.